I slept with my boss because I wanted to feel bigger than my life, and I told myself a dozen clever names for what I was doing so I wouldn't have to call it what it was. I called it momentum, leverage, curiosity. I called it the price of ambition in an office where loud men got promoted and quiet women were asked to take notes. James made me feel loud without raising my voice. He's the kind of man who makes a conference room feel warmer just by walking in. Polished, easy, the right amount of attention on the right person at the right moment. The first time I presented to the executive team, I felt my throat go tight at slide 3 and he cut in with a crisp question that was really an alley-oop. He tossed me a line that set me up to slam dunk the numbers. Later he passed my desk and said, "Perfect recovery," and the way he said it felt like an embossed business card pressed into the palm of my self-esteem. I brought that feeling home to my husband like a trophy I didn't know I was already using to keep score. Ethan is not that kind of bright. He's the steady kind, the person you want on your side when things break because he'll quietly fix 3 other problems on his way to the one you asked about. We fell in love because he made the everyday feel like a place you built together instead of a thing that happened to you. He kissed me at the sink while drying dishes. He never let us run out of toothpaste. He always remembered to ask how a thing went when he knew it made me nervous. If James was a stage light, Ethan was a well-wired house. I married the house. I cheated with the light. The affair didn't begin with a kiss, it began with gratitude. We finished a quarterly sprint that should have swallowed us whole, and the clients didn't just sign. They extended. People were clapping. Somewhere in the racket I heard my own name in James's voice, 2 syllables said like a toast, and looked up to find him already looking at me. "You're the reason we landed that," he said later in his office. He poured 2 small glasses of red from a bottle that had been sitting on the credenza since before I started at the company and handed me one with a smile like a secret handshake. "You did the work, I just made the noise. I should have said thank you and gone home." Instead I let the compliment sit on my tongue like something sweet I hadn't tasted in too long, and when his hand brushed mine, I didn't move away. It progressed in a series of rationalizations that were perfectly shaped to my weaknesses. I stayed late twice because there were last-minute edits before a board packet went out, that was true. The third time, I stayed because I wanted to. That was also true. I texted Ethan in the same tone I always used. "On call again, sorry love, heat up the leftovers without me." And he responded the way he always did. "No worries, drive safe, proud of you." Each permission he gave me in good faith felt like another inch of elastic I could tug without snapping. James became a habit the way a bad posture does, so gradual I didn't notice how crooked I looked until I caught sight of myself at the wrong angle. The first kiss happened in a hallway nobody used. We were both leaving, late enough that the lights were on motion sensors and the floor felt like an empty theater after the audience goes home. He asked, "How are you getting home?" and I said, "Rideshare," and he said, "Let me walk you." A normal exchange, a reasonable offer, and then something in the quiet stretched and thinned and I heard my own breath like I was standing next to myself watching it happen. He cupped my face like he'd done it 100 times in his mind and kissed me. I let him. Worse, I kissed back in a way that told him yes without using the word. I remember the metal taste of fear pressing against the sweetness of being wanted, the rush up my spine, the way the hollow under my breastbone filled with heat. Then I went home and lay next to the man I promised my life to and pretended to be asleep so I wouldn't have to talk, because the second I opened my mouth I was afraid the betrayal would come out of it like smoke. I would love to tell you it ended there, that I woke up the next morning horrified and confessed and we did the brutal, righteous work of repairing what I had cracked. But the second lesson of infidelity, after the first, don't do it, is that guilt by itself is only friction, it won't stop you unless you put your foot on the brake. I didn't. I let it slide. The next time James asked if I had a minute after everyone else left, I said yes. A minute is the easiest lie to believe when what you want is more. We started leaving separately and meeting around the corner. We started having the kind of breathless conversations that feel like secrets even when you're technically talking about work. He paid me a compliment that had a key hidden in it. "I trust your judgment more than anyone's. There are so many doors that line opens if you want to unlock them." I became careful and sloppy in the exact wrong combination. I started wearing my hair in ways I knew James liked and telling myself Ethan wouldn't notice because he liked it every way. I deleted the racy messages and kept the innocuous ones so that if my phone ever lit up on the counter I could point and say, "See? We're talking about deck layouts." I saved James's hotel alias. He had one for all the out-of-town clients he schmoozed. As a 3-letter fake project in my calendar, and once even put a 30-minute therapy block over the time so I'd have something respectable to say if Ethan asked why I was home late and jumpy on a Wednesday. The fact that I used the word therapy as my cover should tell you everything about the kind of person I was becoming, someone who wanted to be seen as earnest while I did the opposite. It wasn't constant. That's another thing people misunderstand. Life continued in regular shape. Ethan and I still bought a potted fiddle leaf fig like idiots and watched it die slowly in the corner because we're not plant people no matter how much we wanted the aesthetic. We still argued about dumb things like whether to split the grocery list by aisle or by recipe and then laughed at ourselves for being too grown up in the most boring ways. I still loved him. I did. That's the ugliest part. Love didn't stop me, it just made me more inventive about hiding what I was doing so I could keep both. I could sense Ethan noticing in ways he didn't have language for. Once, when he kissed me in the kitchen, he paused and drew back a fraction of an inch as if he was listening to something in the air and said, "New perfume?" I nodded and changed the subject. Another time he said, "You've been smiling at your phone more, who's texting you?" And I held up the group chat and scrolled to a safe meme and watched his face relax. He wanted to trust me. I let him. I weaponized his kindness and used it as cover, and there are few sentences I have ever hated writing more than that one. The company gala was a month after the first kiss. Partners, spouses, plus ones. Everyone in the pretty outfits that change how people look at you even if your actual bones are the same. Ethan is beautiful in a suit and he never believes me when I say it. He stood tall and out of place in the expensive room in a way that made my chest ache with pride and protectiveness. James wasn't supposed to matter in that space. He was my boss, and this was my husband. James found a way to matter anyway. He has a talent for filling cracks, and we had one. He didn't touch me inappropriately, he didn't have to. He offered me a champagne flute, fingers brushing mine for half a second too long, and said, "You look like the raise I'm going to fight for." Ethan watched the exchange. I felt it more than saw it. That tiny reorientation of the air when someone you love absorbs a piece of data they didn't want and add it to a file they weren't compiling before tonight. He didn't make a scene. He didn't even mention it on the way home. He kissed my temple at a red light and asked if my feet hurt. I said no and lied with my whole face, not just my mouth. The unraveling was almost boring in its efficiency. 2 days later, after another late night where I told myself I was only in James's room to discuss client comms, which we did, for exactly 12 minutes before doing what we now did by reflex, I came home to find my phone face up on the kitchen counter, open to a thread I thought I'd hidden well. I had been lazy with a cloud sync and clever with nothing. Ethan sat at the table with his hands folded on a legal pad like he'd come prepared to take notes at a meeting he didn't want to attend but was going to anyway because that's who he is. The thread on my phone wasn't even the filthiest one, it didn't have the worst version of me in it. It was enough. He didn't begin with accusations. He asked one question in a voice so level I wanted to crawl out of my own skin. "Do you love him?" The truth is no, not that way. The truth is more damning, I loved the way he made me feel about myself. I loved the leverage, the borrowed spotlight, the sense that I had my life and something extra tucked in my pocket. I said, no. No, and then I said, it was stupid, and it was nothing, and I don't know what I was doing, and hated how teenager those lines sounded coming out of my adult mouth. He listened to the noise I made like it was a smoke alarm and then stood up and turned it off. "You can have your boss," he said calmly, picking up his keys. "You just lost your husband." He left without slamming the door. When people say dignity is quiet, they're describing that exact sound, a latch catching softly while your entire life makes the loudest possible noise inside your ribs. I called his name down the hallway, not because I had something useful to add, but because I didn't understand yet that there was nothing left to negotiate. I didn't sleep that night. The house looked like the same house and felt like a staged model of one. In the morning, I went to work because my body didn't know what else to do. James met me at the elevator bay with a frown he probably thought read as concern. "Everything okay?" he asked, as if we were in a sitcom where my marital implosion was a subplot and not the point. I said we should stop, I said it like a woman closing a window as a storm arrives, too late to do anything about the rain blowing in. He nodded with relief so visible it knocked the breath out of me. It's gotten messy, he said, using the blandest word for the worst thing. We should cool it. The affair I had jeopardized my marriage for vanished the moment it was exposed to daylight. A thing that felt powerful in secret turned out to be flimsy out loud. I went to the bathroom, stared at my blotchy face in the mirror, and did not recognize the person looking back. Ethan didn't take my calls that week. His sister answered one, and when I said, "Is he okay?" in a voice that sounded small even to me, she said, "He's breathing and sleeping and eating with people who love him. You leave him alone." I walked the dog and tried to measure time without his habits anchoring it. Mornings felt like missing a step at the bottom of a staircase. Nights felt like an empty auditorium. I kept finding artifacts of our life. His little dish of screws and batteries just in case, the faded sweatshirt he'd throw over my shoulders on the balcony when I insisted I wasn't cold. And each one cut me the way a paper does, small, precise, bleeding more than you'd expect. HR found out in the least cinematic way possible. An assistant in legal, pulling emails for a separate audit, saw a calendar block tied to a hotel alias and flagged it as a conflict of interest risk. They called me into a room that smelled like coffee and toner and talked about power dynamics and policy in a tone that was meant to be neutral and still managed to make me feel like a teenager in the principal's office. I was put on paid leave pending review. James, of course, had already taken a previously scheduled vacation that happened to start that afternoon. I went home at 2 on a Wednesday carrying a cardboard box with a plant I had already killed, 3 notebooks, and a mug Ethan had bought me that said, in cheerful font, "Make it make sense." He texted me that night from a number I didn't recognize, a photograph of our dog rolling in the grass at his sister's place, tongue out, idiot happy. Under it, 4 words, "She misses her couch." I wrote back, "She misses you." I stared at the screen waiting for the 3 dots to appear and felt, for the first time, the difference between wishing and praying. The dots never came. I didn't blame him. I started therapy for real, not as a calendar entry to hide sins. In the first session, the therapist asked, "What do you want?" the way people always do in movies, and I hated her for being a cliché and hated myself more for not knowing. I said I wanted my husband back and she said, "Beyond that," and I understood she was asking the question I had avoided by making my life louder, who are you when nobody is handing you a script or a spotlight? I didn't have an answer. It was humiliating to admit that I had used my job and then my affair as mirrors because I didn't want to look directly at myself. It was worse to realize that humility, not humiliation, was the only antidote that would actually change anything, and it looked like the opposite of all the grand gestures I kept hoping would save me. It looked like calling my mother and telling the truth. It looked like writing an email to HR in which I took responsibility without explaining myself into a martyr. It looked like texting Ethan a picture of the spare key he still had for our place with the message, "It's yours until you tell me otherwise." He didn't respond to that either. He did, 3 days later, leave a bulleted list in my mailbox in his precise handwriting, "Utilities. Here's what I'll cover for now. Rent. Paid through end of the month, I'll transfer my portion for the next 2 if you stay. Dog. Vet appointment on the 14th, I'll take her. Mail. Forwarded. Therapist. If you want mine's info for someone new, here it is. It was an outline of decency. He did not weaponize his goodness by making sure I noticed it. He just made a path in a jungle and walked it, and if I wanted to follow, I had to put my feet where his had been and keep going. People kept asking me. My sister, my friend from college who called at midnight after seeing the HR email I'd stupidly sent to a personal account. If Ethan had yelled. He didn't. That is how he won. He refused to perform hurt in a way that would let me cast myself as the tragic heroine of a drama I created. He didn't need revenge. He wasn't interested in evening a score. He set down the piece I kept moving around the board and stepped away. "You can have your boss," he'd said, and in the vacuum that followed I discovered what have meant when the thing wasn't a person at all but a version of myself I already knew I couldn't live with. James tried to call me once after HR put me on leave, from a blocked number. I let it ring out, then listened to the message. "We should align on our story," he said in a tone that made my skin crawl. "No need to make this worse than it is. I deleted it and then sat with the delete confirmation prompt on my screen for a full minute because I didn't trust myself to commit to anything final. I pressed yes. The world didn't end. It just got quieter. When the review concluded, the company offered me a demotion with a transfer to another division or a severance package. I took the severance. I told myself it was a strategic reset and then admitted it was also a consequence. The check felt heavy. I paid the rent ahead and set aside 3 months of living expenses and then stared at the rest like it was a sentencing guideline. I called my sister and asked if I could crash for a week while I rearranged the furniture in my head. She said yes without making me say why. She handed me a stack of towels and a mug with a chip in it and said, "You can cry here, but you have to eat," and I loved her with the kind of gratitude that is indistinguishable from grief. The first time I saw Ethan again was a month after the kitchen table reveal. We met at a park because that felt safe. We sat on separate benches for a few awkward minutes like teenagers avoiding eye contact at a bus stop. Then he came and sat next to me. He looked the same except for the way he carried his shoulders, like he had added invisible weight and built the muscle to hold it. "How are you?" he asked. Not a formality, a real question. I said, "Bad, but better than I was," and he nodded like that answer made sense. We talked logistics and logistics only. He didn't volunteer details about his days and I didn't ask. When he stood to go, I surprised both of us by not reaching for him. I think I finally understood that wanting a thing and being entitled to it are not the same. It didn't resolve in a swell of music. It didn't resolve at all, not then. He told me he was filing for separation, and he did. He didn't rush it to punish me, he didn't slow it to keep me on a hook. He said, "I can't be married to someone who treats fidelity like a variable," and I had no speech left to counter that because I had already used up every argument on worse lies. He didn't ask for anything unfair in the division of the small life we owned. He insisted on giving me the couch because my back is terrible. He took the juicer I hated. He left the little dish of screws on the shelf because "you'll need it more than me," which was both a joke and a benediction. I wish I could tell you I earned him back, that there's a version of this story where a woman learns a lesson so thoroughly that she's rewarded with a ribbon that says happily ever after. What I have instead is less cinematic and more honest. I learned how to be predictable in the ways that matter. On time, truthful, present in a room without scanning it for a better feeling. I learned to tell the truth before it calcifies into a confession. I learned to sit in quiet and let it be safety, not punishment. I learned to call people back the day they called me and to throw away means of contact that were only ever going to be a trap. Ethan's victory wasn't a moment, it was a posture. He walked out of a bad triangle with his spine straight and left me to deflate on my own. He didn't humiliate me. He let me do that to myself and then refused to be audience or judge. There is a mercy in that kind of boundary that looks like coldness until you realize it's the only way someone could love you without losing themselves. I will not pretend I would have chosen it for me. I am grateful he chose it for himself. Sometimes, at night, I think about the first time he sat with me on our second-hand couch and held my foot in his lap absent-mindedly while he read. How ordinary intimacy can be when you keep choosing it. How spectacular the quiet is if you earn it. If I ever get to build a life like that again. Whether with him in some later chapter that hasn't been written yet, or with someone else, or alone with a dog on a rug that doesn't match the couch. I will remember this: you can't keep two selves alive in one house. One will starve the other. If you want to glow, do the boring electrical work. Wire your days well. Replace the fuses before they blow. Learn where the breaker is. Turn off the lights when you leave a room. He won because he knew that already. He always did.